Hello, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Angel Alonso. I'm the Vice Dean of the School of Global and Public Affairs at University in Madrid, and I have the great pleasure of moderating today's panel. This is a session on ice-sitting and digital democracy, so in case everyone is fully aware of where we are. And we're trying to get some information about the exact time that we have. We are not sure, as you know, we're running with a bit of a delay because the sessions in the morning took a bit longer than expected. We don't know whether we will have to finish at 3 or 3:15. Hopefully it will be the latter, so we have a little bit more time with our speakers. But I will let you know. One of our speakers have to excuse herself at 3 o'clock, so we know that for sure. The session, of course, is tackling one of the issues that is defined as one of the main pillars of this ministerial, but of course is very transversal in nature. Practically speaking, the digital dimension crosses all the challenges and all the opportunities that we were mentioning today, this morning, for democracy, ranging from transparency to participation to misinformation. And of course, it's a common known theme that technology, it's a double sword or double-edged component into this discussion, no? It can be, on the one hand, a multiplier, an accelerator of all the good things that we associate to democracy, engaging people, making democratic process more inclusive. But of course, together with technology and with digitalization, we have seen an acceleration of some of the negative sides that we are discussing in this forum and this ministerial. The benefit of today's session is that we're going to have the opportunity to cover all these topics with a very distinguished panel of speakers from different angles, representing both governments but also different institutions, with an overall outlook into the questions that we are addressing. Let me just introduce very briefly our panelists. We have Alexandra van Huffelen, who is the Minister of Digitalization of the Netherlands, and Alexandra has to leave us at 3, so we'll try also to be very effective in the way that we run the session. We have Kevin Casas, who is the Secretary General of the International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance, IDEA, based in Stockholm. We have Juan Jesus Torres Carbonell, General Secretary of Digital Administration in the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Digital Transformation in Spain. Next to me, we have Peter Walcott, is the head of the Australian Public Service Commission. We also have Minister Milva Economy, Minister of State for Service Standards in Albania. And finally, online, we have my good friend and colleague from many years in the OECD, Andy Wyckoff, who heads the Directorate of Science, Technology and Innovation. So the other dimension, but the more technical dimension of the topic that we're covering today. In the session, what we're going to do is I'm going to pose a question, trying to cover different angles of the topic at play to each of the speakers. And also because this morning there was not an opportunity to properly exchange with the audience, after the first round, and rather than focusing on a second round, and given that we have very limited time, I think it's more productive if I offer the opportunity for the speakers to react on the things that the other speakers have said. And then, of course, we turn it to you, because this is, of course, about democracy, and this is about participation, so nothing better than sharing the floor with all of you. So let me just go straight into the panel and the questions. And let me start with Kevin, because, of course, Kevin is bringing an overall perspective from International IDEA, which is, as you well know, a very key actor in the democratic space, and they regularly publish the Global State of Democracy report. No? The latest edition was in 2021, and there's another one coming soon. So maybe if Kevin wants to share any insights, that would be very, very welcome. But of course, in the previous report, and hopefully in the next one, they already cover in depth some of the issues, no, that we associate with the challenges and opportunities that digitalization poses for democracy, ranging from digital voting, digital participation, but also challenges like surveillance or digital violence. So along these lines, Kevin, maybe you could share with us your view on the current positive and negative impacts of digital transformation on democracy, these latest trends that you are following from your institution. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Angel, and I want to express my gratitude to the OECD, of course. It's important for IDEA and for the global cause of democracy that the OECD actively gets into the discussion as to how to advance and protect democracy in the face of severe headwinds. Look, to your question, I mean, the positive aspects are many. And I will mention a few in a very quick way. You know, I will sound like one of those guys that speaks in the background of, you know, medication commercials, right? Look, number one, digital technologies lower the cost for collective action, for organizing around causes, demands, grievances, rights. And this is particularly important for vulnerable groups. Number two, digital technologies, and in particular social media, have also created new forms of engaging with public issues in the digital arena. And this is crucial for young people who appear to be very reluctant to use the traditional vehicles of political participation, and yet are, in many cases, very active around causes. Number three, digital technologies have created a new agora in which the communication of opinion is multi-directional. You know, they have done away with that more hierarchical, one-directional communication from the elites down to the masses. Number four, they also enable faster circulation of information, which is something that has proven crucial for the purposes of denouncing corruption and organizing people to demand accountability. Number five, they enable better and more efficient tools to manage electoral processes. And I'm not talking necessarily about e-voting, but about things like the fast transmission and tallying of electoral results, for example. Number six, they have had a positive impact on political finance. They can lower campaign costs, and they have democratized fundraising. The ability to raise large amounts of funds in small donations through the internet is well established by now. And last but not least, they can help immensely with the efficient delivery of public services, which is of course vital for democratic legitimacy. Now, there are many serious negatives too. Number one, they enable the fast spread of disinformation and misinformation, which is clearly fueling runaway polarization levels in many places. Number two, they fragment public discussions. You know, the notion that we all share more or less the same facts and partake in a common conversation has been shattered by the internet and even more by the social media. Number three, they offer great opportunities, as you mentioned, Angel, for surveillance and control, which is something that has not been lost on authoritarian regimes. Number four, they create opportunities to subvert electoral processes, not only through disinformation campaigns, but also through plain cyber attacks. And number five, and this is the flip side of the positive effect on political finance, they can also make fundraising and electoral spending far less transparent. Regulating political advertising and spending on social media has proved enormously challenging, and you also have the role of cryptocurrencies to fund campaigns. So all in all, this is a very complicated equation, and my impression is that we've gone from a cheerful view of the impact of digital technologies on democracy at the time of the Arab Spring to a dark and ominous view after Brexit and the 2016 US election. And we've probably swung too far in the negative direction. The positive impacts of digital technologies on democracy are considerable. So regulation efforts of the digital sphere, for the sake of protecting democracy, should be careful of not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, because the baby has many wonderful features. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kevin. I was just informed that luckily we can keep the session until 3:15, so we have a little bit more time to exchange about this issue. Thank you for a tour de force. I think no one could have sort of do a listing better than you about all these pros and cons, and hopefully we will go back to them later on, because even many of them, if you look at them, it's the same issue, that it can have a positive reading depending on the use, or a negative reading depending of that. Let me maybe focus with Minister Van Hoevelen on the issue of rules and oversight. And allow me to cite the minister who said, I open quote, "Democracy, security, and fundamental rights lie at the heart of our society. We must provide for clear rules and oversight when these values are under threat." So, Minister, what rules and oversights are needed? Sorry, what rules and oversights are needed to manage digital transformation impacts?
Thank you very much for your... Oh, it's out now. Yeah, now it's working, right? Yes, as governments, I believe we do need to take the responsibility. And to respond to the previous speaker, I have a bit gloomier picture of where we stand and what needs to be done. I believe governments need to take the responsibility to play a strong role in shaping the digital transition, to make it in a way that we believe it should be done. And this would be, of course, in line with our values. Fundamental rights and values like privacy, transparency, non-discrimination, all that are, I think, at stake in the digital transition that we're seeing today. And that really makes it possible, or not possible, but necessary, to have very solid rules of the game, oversight, and strategic autonomy as well. And this is also why in the Netherlands we created a value-driven digitalization agenda, which is of course very much also based on the work that is done in the EU. And this agenda is just based on 4 principles. The first would be that everybody can participate in the digital world. In our country, about 20% of the population is unable to really use digital tools or use them in a way that they can interact with government or the private sector. And I do believe we need to change that. And this is not only elderly people, this is also people who just finished working or are in somewhere in midst of their career. It is also children, younger people, that are able to use their smartphone, but not use it in a way to, for instance, interact with government. And not in the least, it's also people that are of my generation, not raised with digital tools and digital skills and in the digital world, and have to rule a digital transformation that we are probably not very much aware of have not enough knowledge of. So this is one thing. Participate in the digital area, make sure that everybody is able to participate, and also, of course, also create governmental services that are going to work for everyone, and services that are not only going to be digital, but also very much also in terms of face-to-face contact. Secondly, what I find important is that everybody can trust the digital world. And this means, I'm not going to expand on it very, very deeply. Of course, we need to work very, very diligently on cybersecurity. And we need to regulate, for instance, AI. Make sure it's transparent and that it's based on our fundamental rights, which it is not today. And I'm very happy that not only the EU, but also the Council of Europe, a far broader group of countries, is working on a treaty in order to regulate AI in a way that is going to look at these fundamental rights and transparency and so on and so forth. Third point would be that everybody has to have control over their digital life. So each citizen must know what kind of information is being retrieved, what kind of information is being required in certain transactions, how data are going to be used, how they're going to be used in the private sector, but also in the public sector. And also they have to be self-determined in how they are going to do it. And yes, I'm aware that there's a cookie law, but we all know that everybody's clicking on yes, and then sending out all of your data to almost everybody in the world, using it for whatever purposes that organization of countries seems to think is right. So one of the things that we're going to create is a public wallet that is going to contain all of your identity stuff and makes it possible for you to share your data, of course, on the basis of your whatever you want yourself, and also on the basis of all the laws and regulation that we believe should be in place, all the values that should be in place. And that means also that you're only sharing the data that you want to share with the organizations that you want to share it with. And then, just to conclude, we believe that the government, the digital government, needs to work in a value-driven and open manner. We need to set the example in terms of transparency, in terms of human rights, in terms of non-discrimination, and that is something that I believe we need to do all together. And this, of course, can only be achieved if we do it as countries together. There's no way that each country for itself can decide to work on all these things, but I believe these principles, so if everybody can join in, can trust, control, and a government that is going to work very hard, is going to be super necessary to make sure that this digital world is a world that looks like the world we want it to look like, and then, of course, is going to lead to trust and a support of democracy and the democratic institutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. This actually paves the way very nicely to turn to our guest online, to Andy Wyckoff, precisely because you advocated for regulation, no, and the role of governments, and of course, we have here representatives from 4 governments. But Andy, in a month from now, you are hosting another very important ministerial for the OECD, the Ministerial for the Digital Economy, in which, of course, I was mentioning how transversal the issue of digitalization is for a ministerial on democracy, but also for you, the issue of democratic implications and the governance of implications are, of course, critical for a ministerial that is focused on the other dimension, no? Which is the digital one. And of course, this is a topic that the OECD has been covered for over 20 years. No? You had the first ministerial in Ottawa in 1998, then we had Cancun, we had Seoul, and of course, we are in a different moment. No? Many things have happened. It would be very interesting to hear what you think are the 2 or 3 key policy priorities, no, that governments should be considering from your side, no, from your dimension when you look at these topics.
So, Angel, thank you very much, and you are a good student of the OECD. I can see that, and you're right. This committee doesn't hold ministerials very often, but when they do, they're, I think, at real pivotal points. And I think we're at another one of those points, and I think the discussions today in Luxembourg bear that out as well. Let me quickly talk about what I think are some of the connecting threads between the 2 ministerials, and I appreciate the opportunity to kind of make this handshake. And a lot of it has already been said. I think one of the most fundamental things right now online, and it's a fundamental human right, is that the right to be safe. And there's various dimensions of this, but without that one fundamental right, not much else really matters in some context. It's about the right to be safe from content, whether it's illegal, and we see a fair amount of that, what we call terrorist, violent and extreme content, gender-based violence, child sexual exploitive material and abusive material, or just harmful content like what you're talking about today about mis and disinformation, cyberbullying, trolling, you name it. And why this stuff has always been around, it comes now at a scale and a speed which is magnified by digital tools. And it's not only about digital and virtual things, it's about physical safety. And I think the minister just spoke about cybersecurity. That will be another focus of the ministerial. It's about protecting the infrastructure, including critical infrastructure, but it's also about protecting people, their mental health, and their well-being. A second point, which is the more general point, is about bringing rights more in line with the digital age. That will be a focus of the CDEP, Committee on Digital Economy Policy Ministerial as well. internet and social media have revolutionized the way we express freedom of expression. Kevin was just talking about this. And we may need to do a rethink of how to balance the priorities between freedom of expression and other online harms in this new era. I want to call out, I think Juan Jesus will talk about this in a second, Spain, which will be our host, but also has been at the forefront of advancing what's Spain's Charter on Digital Rights, which will be adopted last year. That will be the focus of the high-level opening session of the ministerial, as well as a dedicated ministerial workshop. And more broadly, we want to explore kind of emerging approaches in various countries across the OECD, beyond Europe, on how to protect and enforce rights may need to evolve. Let me just end. While policies and principles such as our AI principles are important, I think we need to think about an institutional response as well. And here, one of the things I would ask you to think about, which I think is a priority, is kind of rethinking the governance of technology more broadly. I think we need to move to a more proactive stance rather than reactive. Your sister committee on regulatory policy has promulgated a regulation in this area on agile regulatory governance to harness innovation, which I think is a really good first step. But I just want to say, predicting and shaping how a technology may evolve without negatively affecting innovations that society may need, we've just seen this through the COVID pandemic, is far from simple. Efforts to do this, I think, require a deep technological understanding and an ability to kind of scan where technology is and what the new developments might be. I think we need to do this internationally, given the globally inherent nature of digital technologies, but amongst partners that kind of share a view of technology that's centered around promoting human rights and democratic values in a way that benefits society as a whole. And at the CDEP Ministerial, we'll have dedicated sessions on artificial intelligence, which is an area we've been working on for 5 years now, and immersive technologies. Let me, again, thanks for the opportunity, and I look forward to the dialogue going forward in the panel.
Thank you, Andy, and that's a very ambitious agenda and very comprehensive, the one you have. Maybe in the discussion, I think we could go back to one of the key elements that you mentioned, which is the governance, no? And how we go about that governance of technology in an international scale, no? Since you mentioned Spain, who is the host of the ministerial, which is taking place in the Canary Islands in a month, let me just turn to Juan Jesus Torres, especially to develop in the aspect that you mentioned, no, where Spain has been very pioneering, no, which is the Charter of Digital Rights. I would like to ask you, Juan Jesus, how is the Charter and other initiatives that you might be promoting from the Secretary of State of the Digital Agenda, helping Spain, no, refit democracy for the digital age?
Thank you so much for having me here in this conference and for the question. Regarding the Charter of Digital Rights, I would like to mention that the democracy for the digital age is to guarantee that the rights and freedoms that citizens enjoy in the offline world should be equally protected in the online world. So the intense progress of scientific research and digital or digital-based technologies put on the table the necessity of a regulatory framework that guarantees the protection of the individual and collective rights of persons and the constitutional values. The Charter of Digital Rights doesn't seek to create new fundamental rights, but to adapt these rights and provide a cutting-edge framework for interpretation in order to face and manage the new conflicts. The objective is to provide current legislation onto the technological reality, as well as the public authorities, to define public standards and policies to guarantee and promote these rights. So the Charter of Digital Rights doesn't seek to create new fundamental rights. It is a dynamic process, given that the digital environment is in constant evolution, so in consequence, the limits and the needs of the citizens are changing continuously. So we are working to ensure the existence of an open and permanent process to improve the adaptation of the digital framework to the new circumstances. The Charter was presented by the President of the Government in July 2021 and is made up of several chapters, including digital rights in specific environments, and I would like to remark the following one: data protection, cybersecurity, no discrimination in the digital environment, protection of minors, freedom of expression, freedom of information, receive accurate information, public participation by digital means, rights of access to data for public record, health protections, and guarantee of rights. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Juan Jesus. Sorry. Now, so one aspect that somehow underlies the whole debate about democracy and digitalization is the one of data, no? The use of data and the leverage of data, no? to advance democracy, but also the challenges related to the usage of data, no? In a democracy. I want to turn now to Minister Milva Economy, because she has a wide experience having worked in the public sector on data and statistics. And even in the panel this morning, in the first panel, the head of the statistics in Luxembourg recalled, no, the importance of having good statistics, no, about this dimension. Data as information, of course, is a key element of democratic regimes, and it can be used for governments to keep governments and political actors accountable. Minister, from your perspective, what data is needed to improve democracy, and especially, and maybe this is the most interesting aspect, what actors should be brought in to advance the digital democratic agenda in this front?
Thank you very much. Thank you for making me part of this panel. I would like to start with something that I do believe that digitalization is not irreversible anymore, so we have to cope with that, with the very good things that they have brought, but also the problem that they have caused. Saying that, I would like to add the role that digitalization have had in the democracy. The first thing is that we have to take care about our people, our businesses, and how much easier we are making their life. So we are providing services. In Albania, we have the system of e-services now that provide 1,226 services online. 95% of services is online. And there are 2.7 million inhabitants that are using those services out of 2.8 inhabitants that the country has. And in first months of this year, the system has made application around 30 million application. So the services are there, and they are easily to be accessed for anyone, wherever they are living, in the rural area, in the urban area. If they are young or they are old, they can have access to that information. They can have access to their computer, they can have access to their mobile. So you can make application wherever you are. The second is that, are we making our agencies more accountable? Are we doing accountability as a figure that is important and transmitting this to the public? And the case of Albania is bringing us the examples that to give answer to the population, we are combining data in 55 registers. And by the end of application or by the end of request, the public servant is to give a letter that has a digital signature at the end. So this makes the public service accountable towards the population. And here you have data, 55 registered are doing a lot of application during the month, and this data is there, published. The third thing that I consider that is very important is, do we allow people to have their voice in what we are doing? Are we digitalizing this participation of people in our governance? And in Albania, we have the public participation online through the roster of civil society or through the website of the ministries. And each month we are calculating an indicator that is called the Index of Feasibility of Public Consultation. And this is going up and down because not every time everything is going well. Perhaps we have put things in delay in the website, or perhaps people have not have any kind of desire to answer. And this is something to go deeper in analysis, but this is a situation. And then we have used digitalization to combat corruption, which is not a very easy thing. And we have done this through services, but also we have measured things. For example, one of the things that we have done through the digitalization of services is how much of the contract of the public funds are being used without going in call for tenders. And if in the year 2018 we have had around 10% of the budget going to be contracting without tenders, now this percentage is 3.4. So even this has been declined. And the other thing that is very important is that how we see the international laws influencing in this anti-corruption. In Albania, for example, we have the case of the register of the final beneficiary. Mm-hmm. And the register of the final beneficiary has been easy to create the law. It has been not so easy to implement the law and to create the register. We've had a lot of pre and cons with businesses, but the problem is that you have to communicate that. And through the public communication that is online, everything was there, registered. And so this helped the process. I think that one of the most important things in this data creation and this system communication is if we have in place regulation from the front office and back office. Are those regulations very clear to the public servants? Do they know how to use those? And more the satisfactory rate is high, more we think that this is good. But are we in the government taking care about how we have to re-engineer the situation where people and businesses are not happy? What we are going to do with the data? The second thing that is also important there is the cyber attack. We in Albania have been under cyber attack from, it was very hard, very strong. The system went down for more than 15 days. But this creates us another instrument in the head that you cannot afford cyber attack alone. You have to have experience from other countries. You have to share experience. And also you have to plan in the budget money for infrastructure, digital infrastructure. So more you advance, also the grim world, the dark world is advancing, and they are there to attack you, but you have to be prepared. And this creates another situation that public administration need to be always under training for resilience, because these are resilient situations, and they have to know how to cope with this situation. But doing that, I think that it's very important how we are going to use the data, what kind of data we are going to produce, because having digitalized everything, you have an enormous amount of data. Which are the data? And for that, I think that a good instrument that can be used is the creation of multi-committees with multi-stakeholders. In Albania, we have created one for the Open Government Partnership, where civil society is sitting there and they have to make requests and define their needs to be part of the open data in order that they can access. This is a situation that always needs to be fed, feed with the request from the civil society, but also feed with the improvement that governmental agencies are doing in their everyday life. But the data are there, so we can have data that are related with participation, related with how fast we are providing the services, how much we have heard a given voice coming from stakeholder groups, and data are there. We can use the data. But it depends also on how, as we have heard today, how much independent are the agencies that are dealing with the data. And in the case of Albania's statistical office now is very independent, is a parliamentary institution, so no link with the government at all, and they have to be accountable to all stakeholders in the country. But also for them, it's important that different stakeholders create offers to produce the reports that are needed. So that's all.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, and also for sharing the specific experiences. Let me pick it up on the third, what was the third element that you mentioned, and I love how you put it, voice, no, which is participation. And then I'll turn to Peter, no, because of course, as head of the Australian Public Service Commission, with over 150,000 public servants, this, oh, sorry, I keep losing the sound there. The issue of participation, of course, is critical. So, Peter, in your experience, how should governments work from their inside to foster citizen participation and increase their responsiveness to reinforce democracy?
Thank you, and can also thank the OECD for hosting this ministerial conference. I mean, it's an extraordinarily profound subject, and one that requires a lot of thought. Public sector reform is, as we all know, it's a sort of never-ending journey for all of us, and we're all grappling essentially with the same challenges. It's partly driven, of course, by the speed of technological change and just how quickly that is moving, and how governments can keep up with that, and also citizens' expectations around how government manages those changes. And I've got to say, the digital world and social media is essentially changing the nature of power in democracies. It's very different for authoritarian states, where it's quite a different thing you're looking at. But in democracies, the power that's moving to collective groups just adds to the complexity of how democracy works. And the ability to mobilise quickly, the ability to get reactions very quickly, is part of what we have to deal with as governments in our societies. Now, I'll try and get a bit practical, but the Australian focus on reform, and we've had 3 years ago, we had a major review done on the Australian public sector and what it needed to do. And essentially it was 4 buckets. One was you've got to be much more joined up. Issues are so complex and interconnected that the old pillars, the old structures with which we did things just doesn't work anymore. So, and COVID was an example of that, where, you know, in Australia, you had our health department having to work for the first time with our Department of Home Affairs quite intimately. And it really does change the nature of structures in government. So that's one of the issues we're grappling with. And of course, a big part of that is data and digital, being able to integrate data and digital work at scale. And COVID, again, was, for us, a real accelerator of that. The second aspect we're looking at is being much more people-focused in what we do as public servants. Again, the expectations that we should operate like a bank or like Facebook, and very, very hard for us to meet and keep up with. But also, it's actually fundamental to trust, because people get their experience of government and their trust and faith in government from their dealings with government, in whether it's in relation to services. And also, critically, a part of that, of course, is being able to protect their information and the issue of cyber threats, and of course, the speed at which things move. Then the third aspect of our reform agenda is around integrity in everything we do, which comes back to the whole concept of trust. And then the fourth one is a concept we call partnerships. So the public sector has to be seen as working in partnership we will have a federal system, so with our state and territory governments, has to work in partnership with civil society. It has to work in partnership with First Nations, and that's quite an interesting aspect in terms of Australia too, because the issue there is that what does genuine partnership mean with First Nations? They work and think in a different way than the bureaucracies work and think, and so we have to rethink the whole way and a whole understanding of what partnership is. So it's a whole complex series of sort of mixes there. And one of the things that we've tried to do, again in a practical sense, is we have an Australian Public Service Academy, and we try to teach public sector craft, is what we call it. And again, part of that is how you do engagement, with First Nations people, how you do engagement with civil society or business or trade unions. And again, there's a bit of risk in that because ministers can sometimes get a bit uncomfortable with that sort of engagement. But I think it's absolutely crucial to how we work with civil society and with the public. It's no longer can you do things to people. I think you've got to more and more do things with people. And so it's co-design, it's transparency, it's those sorts of techniques and that are going to be fundamental to the way we work into the future.
Thank you very much, Peter, and for bringing into the discussion very interesting elements, that the issue of expectations and the element of partnerships, no, and multi-stakeholder, not only consultation, but active engagement. We don't have much time. I would like to open up in case any of our panelists has any reaction to anything that has been said. The overall question that I would pose, and anyone feel free to jump in, is maybe the aspect that we haven't covered so much, which is about international cooperation, by countries. So we focus a lot about what governments can do, but what can governments do collectively on an international level? Of course, this ministerial, it's something that governments can do together, take a stand, come together, share best practices, draw conclusions. But in your view, what's the agenda that you would like to see in the next 5 to 10 years? If I might pose these open questions to anyone from our panelists who might want to jump in. Anyone?
I'll have a crack.
Yeah.
I'll have a crack. At least about a specific aspect of the agenda. I mean, obviously, the agenda that has been laid out here can be very, very broad, from setting standards and sharing practices to deal with disinformation and misinformation. I mean, all that stuff. But from where I stand, from the standpoint of international idea and the interest of advancing democracy, one thing that hasn't been mentioned that intrigues me a lot is the need to bring digital technologies into the discussion about the future of political representation. And I'll sort of preface this reflection very, very briefly with, I guess, a personal anecdote, Well, we know that political parties are in a shambles everywhere, particularly in the eyes of young people. And I myself, I have been participating in meetings about political parties, seminars, congresses, you name it, for, 30 years. And every single one of them ends up with all of us saying, including myself, that we need to strengthen political parties because they are essential for democracy, right? And the fact is that we have nothing to show for it because they are in worse shape than ever in terms of their credibility. So perhaps we are just flogging a dead horse. And parties, the way we understand them, might just be a creature of the 20th century. So what I'm trying to get at is that I don't know what will replace political parties, but I have the strong inkling that digital technologies will play, and are already playing, a big role in the way political representation can work, and are playing a big role and will play a big role in enabling a more direct participation in collective decision-making for citizens. And this is really a pending assignment for political science and for political research in general, with obvious impact for the future of democracy. So if you ask me, one of the aspects of the agenda going forward that I would like to see is that, if we care about the future of democracy, we should pay close attention to the role of digital technologies in the future of political representation, because the current model of political representation is broken.
I might just pick up another aspect, which is essentially the process of an election itself, which is fundamental to democracy and the ability to change governments. Because elections are essentially about the losers and making sure the losers accept the result and trust the process, not the winners. And I think that's a sort of the way we can cooperate together as democracies around how we handle elections. There are things such as, and we've talked a bit before about sort of cyber issues and some forces out there to influence electoral outcomes from outside. So how we can work together on that. In Australia, we have an Electoral Integrity Assurance Task Force, which consists of our intelligence agencies and our Australian Electoral Commission, which works on that aspect, and again, how we share information. We're also in Australia, and I'm sure many of you have also done this, in terms of elections, we have we've got the major sort of major public digital media companies, including TikTok actually, as well as Google and all those you'd expect, to take things down. We've got an agreement with them in relation to disinformation around not about the ideas being fought over in that election, but about the credibility of the election. And for example, I'll give you one example. We'll all be aware that Trump supporters attacked the Dominion voting systems in the most recent elections in Australia. We had accusations about these voting systems being in Australia. We don't use them. So we're very quick to move in shutting that down. And we have a sort of disinformation register. So the more we can sort of cooperate as democracies in relation to techniques at work, around the holding of elections, to actually shut down debate about the quality and credibility of the election itself, not the ideas that are being fought about, but about the institution. And I think that's pretty critical. And we're also very vigorous in Australia in actually countering disinformation. So our Australian Electoral Commission ran a really strong and vigorous social media campaign to tackle straight away what we saw as disinformation during elections.
Thank you. What I can add in what will be the future. So internationally, I think that we need more regulation that can drive the process that we're undertaking. It's a need. If we need to be compared and if you need to see how the democracy is functioning in this country. But then democracy, apart of having very general overview, have a country overview. And in the country overview, in my mind, there are two very important things. One is participation in the election, which means that the electoral code in each country need to be revisited with a digital approach. And here we have to work. This is also combined with a lot of digital investment in all countries, because this cannot be done without digital investment. And in the moment that we have a digital voter, we have also to consider that after that, the data that the voters would like to see when the government is doing the job need to be very easy transmitted to them. And the data that for me are very important for this digital voters to be understand are the data that are linked with the public expenditure. So the figures that are in the treasury statistics are not very easy for a common person to understand what is going on in the country. You need to have a more kind of civic statistic interpretation for them to make easy and to understand what is going on. So like this, we can have the combination of digital voters with the digital digital participation, civic participation. Without that, we cannot see the near future. But in all this, we have to be very careful because this information is there, is present. So these are not a very easy action to be undertaken. These need always a mechanism that will make an exchange of view. We'll have a mirror communication. We have to share with each other what are the effects, what are the obstacles that we have, what will be the new reality that we are going to create. It's not that easy. So because everything in digitalization is a new area, is completely new. We have not that much experience as in the democracy itself. Digital democracy is a very new thing. So I can conclude that international cooperation is a must for regulation and also for exchange of view and also lesson learned. And then civic participation has two pillars, the digital voters and the digital explanation of the public expenditure.
Thank you very much. We have only 2 minutes left, but being a ministerial and a forum on democracy, as I promised, I wouldn't like to close the session without at least opening up for I see a couple of comments. If you can just make them very brief, 1 minute only, please. Identify yourself, please, very briefly.
Sorry. Yes, good afternoon. I am Nicole Mansbazawi, and I am with the Secretary of State's Office of Global Women's Issues, working directly for the Secretary of State. Thank you very much for your thoughtful and thought-provoking interventions today. A couple of things that I don't necessarily need answers for, but just for all of us to think about as we go forward, picking up on some themes that you had. Yes, we are definitely moving into the digital world and digital democracy. One thing that keeps me up at night is the digital gender divide and the possibility of further disenfranchising marginalized communities, including women. Second thought, on online harassment is a really big problem, not only for those candidates who would run and who are attacked online, but for also the youth, the young women that would consider entering into politics in the future, but see this harassment happening online, and it would dissuade them from participating in the process. That also goes along with the idea of a digital signature. I love that for holding people accountable, but I also worry about the possible harassment piece of it, so perhaps a number instead of a name to identify people to protect them and their families. The third piece was on artificial intelligence. This also concerns us because we think of women and girls in STEM and the lack thereof. And so when you think of who is designing artificial intelligence, it's mostly men. And so it's leaving women out of the equation in developing these advanced systems. And then my final point is on data and the collection of data and how important it is to think about what we're measuring, and are we measuring just outputs and participation, or are we measuring impacts of the policies that we're putting into place? And are we doing so with a lens of looking at gender disaggregated data to really identify those potential benefits and inclusion? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. My name is Elias Soleil, Ambassador of Costa Rica to the OECD. I want to thank all the panel for such valuable information. At this moment, I have a lot of information in my mind, getting confused. I feel like a victim of digitalization, you know. Especially, I want to be brief. Kevin and Peter outlined very clearly pros and cons of digitalization in public services and how to foster citizen participation, but the cons are concerning me a lot, and maybe we might have to look towards a solution that comes from a multilateral approach. Maybe OECD will be the perfect environment for that. But the issue might be cumbersome from a legal and human rights perspective. Maybe this question is more addressed to Andrew, but I don't know if you want to share your thoughts about it. How do you think we'll need to, I'm going to rephrase it. Do you we'll maybe need to redefine boundaries of freedom of speech and liberty of press to approach the cons that you were explaining? I would love to hear your thoughts about it.
Andy, you want to go very quickly on that?
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you, Angel. I think in the interest of time, that's a topic I'd love to take up with the Ambassador back in Paris, but it just quickly, there's no short, easy, quick answer. It's something I think we need to collectively look at and begin to look at the active experimentation across the OECD countries and beyond to figure out the right balance.
Thank you, Andy. So we were a bit rebel. Actually, we were told to finish at 3:10, so I misbehaved a little bit, but I thought this deserved, and any of the topics we covered could be unpacked and have us for many hours talking about that. I want to thank our speakers and our panelists, and also all of you for participating, and also a big thank you to the team at the OECD, Carlos and the team at Gov for organizing this session that hopefully will kick off more debate about this. Thank you very much.
Thank you.